So the gift from Qatar to the U.S. president clearly doesn't apply here. This law was passed in 1966. The scandal caused international uproar and deeply embarrassed the U.S. government at the time. Welcome back to another segment of the Reporting Norms, my weekly podcast that brings on experts in industry, breaks down complex and relevant matters in today's financial reporting and business environment. In today's segment, I want to talk about the Qatar gift and the issues surrounding it. It's an interesting topic. Let's start with the legal framework. The state of Qatar has reportedly gifted an aircraft to the President of the United States. That act, though headline grabbing, falls into a very specific set of laws and policies. Some are pointing to the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FCPA, of 1977. If you recall from my first episode when I discussed the FCPA and its initial spark that came from the Watergate investigation in the early 70s, you'll recall that while probing President Nixon's campaign financing, investigators discovered that corporate slush funds were not just used domestically, they were also fueling foreign bribes. Then the Lockheed scandal happened, which was perhaps the most pivotal case. It involved Lockheed Corporation, now Lockheed Martin, a major U.S. aerospace and defense contractor. Lockheed admitted to paying over $22 million in bribes to foreign officials in countries like Japan, including the then Prime Minister Kakuei Tanaka. Tanaka was accused of accepting $1.8 million in bribes from Lockheed, funneled through a trading company, Marubeni Corporation, to influence Japan's national airlines, All Nippon Air, or ANA, to purchase Lockheed's L-1011 TriStar aircraft. In Japan, Tanaka was referred to as a shadow shogun even after stepping down as prime minister. He was convicted of these bribes and crimes committed and convicted in 1983, sentenced to 4 years in prison, and fined 500 million yen, or about $2 million at the time, but he remained free while appealing his case. The appeals process dragged on until his death in 1993, and he never served any prison time. Lockheed also admitted it had paid approximately $1.6 million to Italian officials during the late 60s and early 70s. The disclosure of this figure in Italy played a key role in triggering a judicial investigation, which led to the criminal conviction of former defense minister Mario Tanassi and the resignation of President Giovanni Leone due to mounting public pressure at the time. This case is often cited as a case study in how foreign bribery can collapse public institutions, in this case, the Italian governmental leadership. Thirdly, Lockheed also admitted to paying about $1.1 million in bribes to Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. Lockheed wanted the Netherlands to procure the Lockheed F-104 starfighter. Prince Bernhard was not prosecuted, but was forced to resign from all public and military roles. And there were other countries that were paid bribes by Lockheed. Some of the details are a little sketchy, but they do include Germany, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. And these bribes were used to secure military contracts for Lockheed's aircraft. It's the C-130 Hercules, the L-1011 TriStar, as I mentioned earlier, and the F-104 starfighter. The scandal caused international uproar and deeply embarrassed the U.S. government at the time. Other bribes uncovered by the SEC and DOJ at that time revealed also that Exxon, Gulf Oil, Mobil, Texaco, they had all paid bribes to secure oil concessions. Another company, United Brands, now known as Chiquita Brands, was caught paying a $1.25 million bribe to the president of Honduras. And then Northrop and GM were also implicated in overseas corruption practices. So in total, over the period in the 60s and 70s, about $300 million in illegal or undisclosed foreign payments were reported by U.S. companies in the mid-1970s. These activities gave birth to the FCPA because Congress saw these revelations as a threat to U.S. credibility, investor confidence, and global stability. And so in response, a bipartisan effort led by Senator William Proxmire, a Democrat from Wisconsin, and Representative Ben Rosenthal, a Democrat from New York, pushed forward what would become the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and was later signed by Jimmy Carter on December 19th, 1977. So let's get back to the Qatar plane. So we can know that the FCPA is designed to prevent Americans from bribing foreign officials, not the other way around. So the gift from Qatar to the U.S. president clearly doesn't apply here. However, the relevant statute is the Foreign Gifts and Decorations Act, or FGDA. This law was passed in 1966, and it prohibits U.S. officials from accepting valuable gifts from foreign governments unless the gift is of minimal value, currently about $480, or it's accepted on behalf of the United States and reported appropriately. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard of gifting from foreign countries. Now, if this aircraft is valued in the tens of millions, I think it's probably more in the mid 9-digit territory. It can't simply be accepted for personal use. It must either be used officially or refused. So what led to the passing of the FGDA in 1966? A little bit of history here. Cold War diplomacy and gift-giving proliferation during the 1950s and the early 60s primarily gave rise to the FGDA. And also, as the U.S. expanded its global diplomatic presence during the Cold War, gift-giving between heads of state and diplomats became increasingly common. This presented two key problems. Firstly, there was a lack of regulation. There was no uniform federal standard for handling these types of gifts. Agencies and officials handled them inconsistently. Some accepted them and kept them. Others returned or reported them voluntarily. Secondly, there were national security concerns. U.S. intelligence and ethics officials grew increasingly worried that high-value gifts could be used as leverage or influence tools by adversarial governments, especially the Soviet Union and its allies at that time, which is about 60 years ago. The U.S. Constitution already contained an Emoluments Clause, and just for specificity and precision, it's Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8, which prohibits federal officials from accepting any present, emolument, office, or title from foreign states without congressional consent. However, the clause lacked enabling legislation to define what constituted a present or emolument. There was no administrative mechanism for how to declare or handle such gifts if they were received. This created legal ambiguity and risk for U.S. officials, particularly ambassadors, cabinet members, and even the president, who routinely receive elaborate or expensive gifts during state visits. There were also concerns over undue influence and appearances of corruption. Public pressure mounted as media reports occasionally highlighted lavish gifts that were given to U.S. diplomats by Middle Eastern monarchies and other foreign powers. Potential favoritism in foreign policy decision driven by personal gain were also a concern. Though there was no major scandal that directly triggered the law back in 1966, the cumulative ethical pressure prompted action from Congress. So the Foreign Gifts and Decorations Act was signed into law on October 15th, 1966, almost 60 years ago. It provided a structured legal framework such that federal employees could only accept gifts of minimal value. At that time, it was defined as $50, but then later adjusted for inflation, now at about $480, as I mentioned earlier. Gifts above that threshold must be either refused or accepted on behalf of the United States and turned to the General Services Administration or archives. Decorations or honors could only be accepted with congressional consent or under strict guidelines. In short, the key objectives of the FGDA was to prevent undue foreign influence over U.S. officials. It was also to clarify constitutional requirements under the Emoluments Clause to promote transparency and uniformity across agencies and to preserve public trust in the conduct of American diplomacy. While not driven by a single explosive scandal, the FGDA was a proactive legislative effort to close a serious ethics and security loophole. It was rooted in concerns about Cold War diplomacy, the inconsistent practices, and lack of a mechanism to enforce constitutional protections against foreign influence. So now, what government agency makes the call on FGDA-related matters? The answer is There is no single FGDA enforcement office. Instead, several agencies share the responsibility. They are the Office of Protocol at the State Department, which manages reporting and documentation. You also have the GSA, which acts as the custodian for surrendered gifts. And then you have the Office of Governmental Ethics, which helps interpret and enforce ethical guidelines, with each federal agency responsible for its own internal compliance with the FGDA. So the FGDA law provides an umbrella of oversight, which can help prevent abuse, but it can also muddy the waters when it comes to accountability. So at the center of this protocol dilemma is a woman named Monica Crowley. She was just confirmed on May 12th of this year as the new chief of protocol of the U.S. Monica Elizabeth Crowley was a political commentator, author, and former government official. She was born in 1968 in Arizona, raised in New Jersey, has a BA in political science from Colgate University, and both a master's and PhD in international relations from Columbia. Earlier in her career, she served as a foreign policy assistant to former President Nixon, contributing to his final two books and authoring her own works on his presidency, two titles called Nixon Off the Record and Nixon in Winter. She became a prominent media figure, working as a political commentator on Fox News from 1996 to 2017, and hosting the Monica Crowley Show, a nationally syndicated radio program. In the public sector, she was appointed as Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs at the U.S. Department of the Treasury during President Trump's first term, where she received the Alexander Hamilton Award, the department's highest honor. Last December, President Trump nominated her to serve as Ambassador, Assistant Secretary of State, and Chief of Protocol of the U.S. So in this role, for which she is now confirmed, is responsible for managing diplomatic protocol for the President, VP, Secretary of State, including overseeing state visits, accrediting foreign diplomats, and maintaining Blair House, the official guest house for visiting dignitaries. She brings decades of political and media experience from working with Richard Nixon to serving in the Treasury Department under President Trump. Now she's the one in charge of overseeing diplomatic etiquette, including the processing of the Qatar gift that we're talking about. So, Chief of Protocol, Crowley's office will be pivotal in determining how this aircraft is cataloged, evaluated, and possibly retained or returned. For the sake of argument, let's assume that the gift is retained on behalf of the U.S., and there's serious consideration given to using it for official presidential travel. That may sound very appealing. After all, the Qatari plane is a luxurious state-of-the-art Boeing 747-8. But to bring it up to Air Force One standard, that's an entirely different reality, and the current reality has a price tag estimated somewhere between $3.2 to $4.5 billion. Why so expensive? Well, here's some of the things that are involved. Complete disassembly and inspection. So every wire, every panel, every system would be inspected for surveillance or compromise. That could cost anywhere between $100 to $200 million. A hardened airframe and EMP protection. EMP protection refers to the aircraft's ability to withstand and continue operating during or after an electromagnetic pulse or EMP attack. Just as an aside, an EMP is a burst of electromagnetic radiation that can be caused by nuclear detonations at high altitudes or result from non-nuclear EMP weapons or even solar flares. Most airplanes today have the ability and protection of EMP from lightning strikes, for example, but Air Force One would have a significantly more sophisticated protection for its purposes. So such EMPs can disable or destroy electronic systems and unshielded electronic components across a wide area, effectively blinding modern infrastructure and communications. So why EMP protection matters is because Air Force One is a mobile command center and is expected to remain functional even during nuclear war. EMP protection ensures continuity of government operations from the air, preservation of command authority over U.S. military and nuclear assets, and most importantly, national leadership survivability in a worst-case scenario. Reinforcing the aircraft for physical and cyber warfare conditions could cost anywhere between $300 to $500 million. A few other things that are needed are secure communication systems. The president needs to be able to command nuclear forces from the air. Installing encrypted satellites, fiber networks, and secure voice comms adds another $500 to $700 million. Defensive countermeasures. This relates to anti-missile systems, radar jammers, and cyber defense tools, which could cost in the range of $600 to $900 million. And of course, there's the interior conversion. The aircraft must essentially be a mobile White House. So it has to have a medical bay, a conference center, presidential suite. That's going to cost somewhere between $400 and $600 million. Then there's testing, integration, and oversight. The aircraft must pass every test under military and FAA standards. That could cost anywhere between $300 to $500 million or more. And that's before you factor in project management and the inevitable congressional oversight hearings. So it's not about luxury. It's about building a secure, survivable airborne command post. So having said all that, what happens next? So if the Qatar aircraft is accepted for official U.S. use, it enters a long, expensive, and tightly controlled process of modification and vetting and doing the things that I just mentioned. That pipeline could take no less than 4 to 6 years based on past timelines for Air Force One upgrades, potentially longer given the foreign origin of the aircraft and the need for an unprecedented level of disassembly, security verification, and re-engineering. The current VC-25B Air Force One replacement project, for reference, was launched in 2018 and is not expected to be fully operational until 2027. That's a decade of development, testing, and certification to transform a Boeing 747-8 into something capable of operating as a hardened presidential command post. The Qatari plane, while luxurious, would need to be reworked from the inside out. Every bolt, every chip, every wire, if it were to ever carry the commander-in-chief. But if this gift is framed as a personal offering to the president, the issue becomes far more technical. It becomes a U.S. constitutional matter, and here we need to talk a bit about the Emoluments Clause. And I'm sure many of you heard about the Emoluments Clause, and it's in the Constitution, which basically states no person holding any office or of profit or trust under the U.S. shall, without the consent of the Congress, accept any present, emolument, office, or title of any kind, whatever, from any king, prince, or foreign state. That's directly from the Foreign Emoluments Clause. So what was the purpose of this provision to begin with? It was to prevent foreign influence over U.S. officials, especially the president, through gifts, payments, or honors that could corrupt loyalty or shape policy. Now, historically, this clause was rarely tested until Trump's first term, when multiple lawsuits alleged he had violated the clause by continuing to benefit from his hotels and other business ventures, which hosted foreign diplomats and officials. These lawsuits were filed by watchdog groups such as the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. They're also known as CREW. Another watchdog group called Free Speech for People, the Constitutional Accountability Center, or CAC, and state attorneys general from Maryland and the District of Columbia. Additionally, you had members of Congress claiming that foreign governments were, in effect, patronizing the president's private business to curry favor. Trump's legal team argued that routine business transactions were not emoluments, and the cases became bogged down in legal technicalities, including questions of standing. Ultimately, none of the lawsuits led to a definitive Supreme Court ruling, leaving the Emoluments Clause legally untested in modern practice, but still politically very potent. So, if this Qatari aircraft is accepted personally and not as property of the U.S. government, it would almost certainly trigger renewed legal scrutiny and quite possibly a constitutional showdown, specifically due to the Emoluments Clause. So here's the real question at heart of it all. Is this gift a sincere token of goodwill or an entanglement wrapped in luxury? It may be symbolic, it may be strategic, it may be diplomatic generosity, or it may be an opening move in a deeper game of influence. That brings us back to Dr. Crowley. As chief of protocol, she stands at a remarkable intersection of law, diplomacy, and national security. How she chooses to interpret, process, and respond to this gift may define not just her legacy, but signal how the administration as a whole plans to balance prestige with principle, as well as a host of other issues that we can cover in another episode. So, will the plan be cataloged and stored under U.S. government authority, initiating years of technical upgrades? Or will it become an ethical flashpoint, testing the Constitution and political will in real time? We'll all be watching. I know I'll be watching. The world will be watching. So, until next time in the reporting norms, stay transparent. So long.